Governor Whitman, you're involved in a democracy task force as part of New York University School of Law. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your work with this project and what it's in response to.
Really, the Brennan Center at NYU is the one that came to us and said, what we want to do, and that's why I joined it without even thinking twice.
And it's a bipartisan.
It's a bipartisan,
method.
nonpartisan group. And we're trying to look at those important functions that underline a democracy and to see if we can come up with suggestions of how to codify or to ensure that the norms that we've accepted for so long actually are followed. It's not the first time that we've seen deviation from it. I mean, we've had presidents who, well, Richard Nixon with Watergate, and after that we got the federal prosecutor. When John Kennedy appointed his brother as Attorney General, we got the no nepotism law. It's a question of trying to ensure that the things that we assumed were the way people would act in public office, or assumed to be the separations between government and the press, government and the law enforcement, are in fact being followed.
Well, let me ask you about the outcome. For centuries, government has operated sometimes for the good and sometimes for the not so good. Mm-hmm. So what is the expectation here?
Well, again, we're trying to, there's still been norms and parameters of behavior that have not been exceeded regularly. They get exceeded from time to time. We have seen that, where people do go outside of what one would expect of them. But it hasn't been a continuous behavior. We're beginning to see more of it happening. And frankly, it's not always at the federal level. It's sometimes happening at the state and local level. So it's trying to put some parameters around that so the public knows what questions to ask of their elected officials, what kind of standards to hold them to, about those issues about which they should be concerned. Why should they care? That's one of the things that we have got to explain. Why should you care that the judiciary maintain an independence? Why should you care that somebody in a position of influence speaks out, gets ahead of an investigation? Why should you care that that might color how the investigators do their work, or how, if should it go to court, it will ever be handled in the court? Those are the kinds of things that we want to get out and want to discuss. Some of it may be recommendations for
legislation, perhaps?
For legislation, it might be, but we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
With the congressional elections coming up this November, are you expecting to have some kind of a conclusion ahead of time? So as you've indicated, people will know what questions to ask about their candidate.
Well, we'd like to. We'd like to have at least some of them. That's one of the discussions we've been having. Should we release things incrementally or wait until we've done everything? But there's so many issues that we want to take on that have been brought forward by people. I mean, it's been amazing the number of people from whom I've heard once that task force was announced. People from every spectrum saying, please, we've got to do this. We've got to know, what does it mean? What does the emolument clause really mean? Why should we care that somebody in federal office isn't making money on the side by virtue of their federal office? Why does that bother me, the taxpayer? Why should I care if they're making money because they're in public office?
Well, you've been looking into this, and as a former governor, how does New Jersey's state government operate, do you think? Are we pretty efficient? Does the government have the trust of the people of New Jersey, in your estimation?
We do a lot better than a lot of states. We really do. I mean, sure, we have our problems, and people right now are just not trusting anything. And, you know, while that's good, it's not the answer. That's part of the problem that I see with going forward. For instance, if you look today, every poll will say that 29% of the American people identify as Republicans, 30% as Democrats, and 40% as independents. So the independent, non-affiliated is the biggest party, and it's growing. The problem with that is they're saying they don't like either choice, but they're not doing anything to change the kind of choices they get from the primaries, as those are controlled by the two parties. And the message that I send to people is, look, neither party may be perfect for you, but pick the one that you're most comfortable with and get in and vote in primaries to change it, to try to get it back to where you think it should be.
Well, we'll be hearing more about the Democracy Task Force, which you're part of, Governor Whitman. And thank you very much for sharing your views with us.
My pleasure. Delighted.